everybody's here. We've got a reliable information from Mr. Mrinal Bhargav that says can see and hear as well. Excellent. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Buongiorno, namaskar. We are here again for the third in the series. Third, is it, Reshma? Third one, right?
Yes, it's the third.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about the Sistine Chapel. Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. Okay, La Cappella Sistina. And with us again, we have Reshma Nayyar, who has delighted all of us over these past few weeks. And thank you to Francesca Mendola, the director of the Italian Cultural Center, with whom we're having this collaboration along with CSMVS. So ladies and gentlemen, today is a talk which is complex in terms of what Reshma and I were talking about. So without much ado, I will request Reshma to please address us all. Thank you, and have a lovely morning with us, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, Anupam. Let me just open my presentation.
And if the panelists can hear me, if the audience can hear me, Reshma has been very generous in mentioning that because the narrative is winding and there are lots of visuals that we are going to go through. And in case there are any queries, please feel free to put them in the question answer box. And we will try to pick them up right now, right in between her talk and not at the end. So please feel free to put your thoughts into it. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me just qualify that. Save your questions about meaning and things like that for the end. But while I'm presenting, if you lose track of what I'm referring to, where a specific thing is located on the ceiling, then please do put that question in right away, because I'd like to stop and clarify that before going further. Okay, so this is the third in a series of 6 lectures on illusionism in Italian ceiling painting. And it is also the most complex of the lectures, simply because the composition is enormous and very, very complex. I should mention, I'll be touching very briefly on what is depicted. My focus is going to be on the kind of illusionism used. And what do I mean by that? In very simple terms, if you look at this interior view of the Sistine Chapel that's on the screen right now, you will notice a couple of things. So there is this main altar wall has Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which was painted decades after the ceiling. So keep in mind, if you're looking at any view which has the altar wall, that was painted differently during the time we are talking about. Okay. The other thing is the dimensions of the chapel are enormous. So from floor to ceiling is about 60 feet in height, and it's a narrow and long space. So it's like a rectangle. The dimensions of the Sistine Chapel follow those mentioned in the Bible for the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so the main problem we're going to face is when I'm talking about details. For example, a figure here, which is really not clear. If I tell you this is one of the inudi, one of the famous nudes that are on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So bear with me for a while, even if it seems a little disjointed right now. As we progress, you'll be able to situate the different parts better. So let me point out a couple of things before we go further. This line here, okay? There are windows at this level. There are windows, okay? And the windows are arched. And there is a cornice that runs from the start or the springing of the arch. So this is the cornice I'm referring to right now. Okay, so the window and the arch and this cornice. Everything above this cornice has been painted by Michelangelo. So when we talk about his decoration of the Sistine ceiling, we're talking about this entire area. Okay. One other thing I'd like to point out, there are certain portions of the ceiling that are architectural. Okay? And by that, I mean they are actually part of the architecture and they protrude, they're three-dimensional. For instance, this cornice, the arches above, so not the window arch, but the arch above the window, and these triangular spaces. So note that the curvature of the wall is such that the triangular spaces, these are called spandrels, but I'm just going to call them the triangles. The triangular spaces are actually on a curved surface. Okay. In the Vatican, in St. Peter's Square, just a moment. This is the location of the Sistine Chapel. Okay. And here we have an interior view where our backs are towards the altar wall that we just looked at. So the wall that Michelangelo painted much later is behind us, and we're looking towards the entrance of the chapel. This is the door to enter the chapel when it's in use for official purposes. Okay. So here is a view from outside that door looking inwards. Okay. And here's a view after entering the chapel with the College of Cardinals assembled. Now, I should caution you about proportions. There's a lot of distortion in these photographs simply because the space is so large and very high and narrow. Okay? So here from ground level, when you look, it actually looks like the regular human size is very large compared to all these painted figures. Actually, most of the painted figures are life size or larger. That gives you an idea of the scale. Now, to start with, I want to just go over what was painted, the paintings that existed in the chapel before Michelangelo began work on the ceiling. So I'm going to talk about that. If you look at the image on the right, there's level 1, and there's an architectural cornice. Okay, there's level 2, there's another cornice, and there's level 3, which is the window level, where the cornice intersects at the springing of the arches, the arch tops of the windows. So the lowest level, the bottom level, has fictive tapestry. This is all pre-Michelangelo. So illusionism in wall decorations was quite the norm in ceiling decorations too. And here you have a great example. We saw something similar in the first lecture in the series, where in the Camera degli Sposi, 2 of the walls have fictive curtains painted on them. So this is the ground level. The next level has the famed late 15th century panel paint, frescoed panels, which on the right side, this is the north wall, has episodes from the life of Christ. And on the left wall, let me just see if I can go back. The left wall here has images that correspond to the life of Christ, but they're from the life of Moses. Okay, so New Testament on the right, Old Testament on the left. But the lower level has fictive tapestries on both sides. And this third level, the window level, has between the 2 architectural cornices, has a series of portraits of popes. Okay, and these are fully painted, and the popes are portrayed as if they are standing in architectural niches. but they are fictive niches. It's all painting. Okay, so there's a lot of illusionism on the walls of the Sistine Chapel. There was when Michelangelo started painting. Notice in this image on the right, to get a better sense of the shape of the window, these semicircular, I'm going to call it picture fields above them, they are called lunettes. Lune means moon in French, so lunette is like a moon-shaped field. So these are lunettes, and then above the lunettes, you have the triangular compartments. Remember that these outlines are architectural in nature. They actually do protrude from the surface, from the wall and the lower part of the ceiling. Okay, a better image which lets you see the three levels. Okay. Remember that up till more or less the top of the lunettes, the wall is flat. This is actually the wall, the barrel vault. So the vault of the Sistine Chapel, right? The springing, the beginning of the vault begins at, somewhere around here. Okay, just one moment, because I forgot to start my timer.
So in the meantime, some of the participants were asking what is the size of the ceiling. So just for them, the size of the painted ceiling is about 40.5 meters into 13.2 meters.
Okay.
Just filling in while Reshma.
Okay. Just one moment. I do have the dimensions, which I'll come to later, but thank you, Anupam. All right. So what I'd like you to notice over here, so you have the lunette and a photograph of a lunette and a photograph of a triangular area which is above the lunette, so you can see it beginning here. Okay, remember that this portion where the triangular spaces are already curving inwards. They're not flat surfaces like the wall, which kind of ends at this level. When we talk about illusionism on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, it's important to note that Michelangelo created a very complex and at times very confusing composition. There are a lot of areas of the composition, and by areas, I don't mean physical areas as much as types of areas, where what is depicted is confusing in terms of meaning, but also in terms of what type of object is it supposed to represent. So for instance, to clarify a little more, in the lunettes, it's very clear these are painted figures. So they are seated on these architectural blocks, but these are painted blocks and painted figures. It's very sculptural in quality. These figures look like people or statues that are positioned here, but actually it's a two-dimensional surface. Above the triangular areas instead, you have these earth-toned nude figures. These are different from the inudi that I spoke about earlier. And these are usually referred to as genii, plural of genius. Okay, so with two eyes. These genii are some of the most confusing elements of the Sistine ceiling. It's unclear whether they represent people, or are they supposed to be paintings of people, or are they supposed to be paintings of sculpted figures? Okay? And what exactly is their meaning? There's a lot of debate about it. These are some of the much smaller figures on the ceiling. I wanted to point them out just to give you a sense of how complex it's going to get, how certain things do not work intuitively in this ceiling. So it's fascinating to try and understand what's going on, but it can be very frustrating too, because you don't always get an answer that appears logical. Okay. Now, on the left, we have a reconstruction of what the ceiling looked like before Michelangelo was commissioned to paint it. So he was commissioned by Pope Julius II from the Della Rovere family. Julius II's uncle, Sixtus IV, was responsible for the rebuilding of the Sistine Chapel itself. So the adjective Sistine comes from Sixtus IV, from the uncle of the Pope. So the Pope, who was the uncle of the Pope, who commissioned Michelangelo to decorate the ceiling. Now, you can see very clearly in this image on the left what the ceiling structure was like. So notice that there is no right angle in the corner. The walls meet at right angles, but above them, this curvature from left to right is also echoed from front to back. Okay, so the barrel wall actually is barreled, if you will, even at the long edges. And you don't have a right angle joint in the corners of the ceiling. Instead, you have what I'm going to call a pendentive, which is curved in two directions. So it's curved this, oops, excuse me. It's curved this way and it's curved this way. Okay, so to whatever is painted here, whatever Michelangelo painted here, to view it correctly, you'd have to be standing and looking towards the corner at an angle. Okay, that's how you would get the best viewpoint for these corner figures. Okay. The dimensions are here. The main thing I would like you to understand, because I'm very bad with dimensions, it's an enormous, enormous area. And Michelangelo painted it in a period of about 4 years with very little help. You know, comparatively, if you were to think about what he achieved and the aid he had, it would be quite fair to say he did it solo. Even though he did not actually do it solo, technically he did have helpers, he did have some painters helping him initially, but the lion's share of the work was done by Michelangelo. Okay. It's not only that the area painted was enormous, it's also that it was a complicated area because it had the curvature on these sides as well as the curvature on the long and short edges. On top of it, there's something else that he gets credit for. Just one moment. I'm sorry, I really need to go back to this image. When Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to decorate the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, he asked Michelangelo to represent the 12 apostles on the ceiling. So there is some debate as to where those apostles would have been positioned. Would they have been in the lunettes? Would they have been triangular figure, spaces? Most likely they would have been between the triangular spaces, okay? Where now we actually have prophets and sibyls. The point actually is that Michelangelo believed that would be a poor decoration, an unworthy decoration for a space as important as the Sistine ceiling. And he suggested including more things. Now, it's not very clear who assisted him. There are some theories. The most likely name is prelate called Egidio di Viterbo. Whoever designed everything, Michelangelo deserves a lot of credit for it because he was an extremely pious person. And some of the ideas, many of the ideas are his alone, artistically for sure, but even in terms of the subject matter. All right. Now, let me go back to where I was on the presentation. Yeah. I want to point out something that So this image you're looking at, the central image, okay, which has almost the entire ceiling in one frame, is more or less the view you get when you're actually in the Sistine Chapel. It's very difficult to actually identify the different parts because there are just so many images. There's so much happening that it's overwhelming. Okay. Now I want to point out the different viewpoints being catered to by Michelangelo's composition. But before I get there, I want to describe what is called, or I want to explain what is called in literature on the ceiling, the spine of the Sistine ceiling. So there are 9 narrative panels: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, that alternate between small, large, and so on. The end panels on both sides are small panels. Okay, all of the panels are oriented in a manner that anyone entering the Sistine ceiling from the main entrance that we looked at earlier, so where you'd be facing the altar wall as you see on the right side, this is the orientation that you would see. So the 9 panels are oriented in this manner. Okay, all the imagery is right side up like this. You'll notice something when you look at the small panels. Okay? So the large panels take this entire space between what is a fictive cornice on both sides. So Michelangelo, this is an actual cornice, the one that is at the springing of the window arches. Michelangelo copies that, or I don't want to say copies that, extends the space upwards with a fictive cornice. Okay? That's the fictive cornice. And the fictive cornice on both sides are the side ends of the large panels. For the small panels instead, okay, and remember that all these panels are oriented this way. For the small panels, you have figures which are oriented according to the imagery on the walls. And what is on the side of the panels, which are pairs of inudi, we will look at details, so don't worry about it right now. I just want you to understand how the orientation of the surroundings of the small panels work. These are oriented in the same direction as the walls, the lunettes, and the triangular spaces, and everything between the triangular spaces up to the fictive cornice. And the same thing happens on the other side. All of this is oriented to a viewer who is facing the long wall. Okay, very quickly, let's look at the 9 panels. The first one is the separation of light and darkness. So you're looking up. Remember, all these are on the ceiling in the center in what is called the spine of the Sistine ceiling. Okay, so you look up, you see a view of God in the sotto in su perspective. So God is depicted as if he's in the heavens above us and we are looking up. And we are actually standing below him and looking up. So the perspective works wonderfully as it's meant to. It's the sotto in su perspective. Each of these subjects is taken from the Old Testament, and there are verses which they correspond to specific verses. Okay. The next episode is the, oops, I'm so sorry, I have this labeled wrongly. This is the creation of the sun and the moon, and the one at bottom right is the separation of land and water. How did I do that? Okay. The other thing, foreshortening. Okay. So look at the figure of God here at the lower right. The figure is foreshortened. Okay. As if, look at this right hand, how beautifully it is foreshortened, as if it's protruding outwards or downwards towards us. And actually this detail shows very beautifully how the orientation of these inudi. Let me just see my, just one moment. So I should just write this out in Hindi. The word inudo is a singular, inudi is plural. This is pronounced like a Hindi near. So inudi. Okay. When we speak about the inudi on the Sistine Chapel, these are the figures we're talking about. The ones that flank the smaller panels of the ceiling. And between the inudi, I'll come to this a little later, there are fictive bronze medallions. The important thing that I want you to note for now is the viewpoint, assumed viewpoint of the viewer. So this is right side up, and right side up. But for these figures, you need to be standing facing a wall. Okay. If you're looking up, these figures do not really make sense. So this composition makes perfect sense, but these do not from the viewpoint of someone entering the Sistine Chapel. Okay, the creation of Adam, which is the most famous of the Sistine Frescoes. Note the inudi here. So these inudi are actually part of the smaller creation of Eve that comes after it. And note how their orientation is very different from the orientation of the creation of Adam. The creation of Eve. Here you can see a good example of the fictive bronze medallions. Okay. We'll look at images where the viewpoint is correct for the inudi. After that, you have the temptation and the expulsion from paradise. I will just point out one small thing here to give you a sense of just how innovative and complex and confusing Michelangelo's composition is, not just in terms of illusionism, but also in terms of iconography. So if you look closely at the serpent, yeah, it's unclear whether the serpent has one tail or two tails. So I'm inclined to believe, because see, there's a left thigh here, and this appears to, this is the tree trunk, but is there a separate left thigh that ends over here? Or is this tail wrapping around, going up, and then wrapping around the tree trunk and ending here? Is the serpent male or female? Okay, this, I don't have the answers to that, but I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that the Michelangelo's compositions can be very, very frustrating and confusing to understand completely. Okay? I will also just mention something else, which if you look at this innudo, he carries something like a cornucopia that is overflowing with acorns. Now, the Pope who commissioned the ceiling painting was from the Della Rovere family. The word rovere means oak tree. So the acorns come from the oak trees. So this is an allusion, a reference to the coat of arms, to the family name of the patron of the ceiling decoration. The last three of the panels, the picture panels in the spine, are from the story of Noah. You had the drunkenness. Oh, I'm so sorry. The drunkenness of Noah is right at the bottom. This one is the sacrifice of Noah, which some scholars have identified as the sacrifice of the Sun King. This is the flood, the deluge, and this at the bottom is the drunkenness of Noah. Okay, now here I have actually two photographs sort of superimposed, and you can note how I put a blue border to the one below, simply because the transitions won't be perfect because of the different viewpoints of the photograph being taken and the curvature of the ceiling. But it gives you a good sense of the fictive cornice that Michelangelo painted on the ceiling, which forms the two sides of the central panels in the spine of the ceiling. Okay, then in the next slide, we're going to look at the same images, which I've just cropped down the center and rotated 90 degrees to the left here and 90 degrees to the right here. And what you will notice is, so right now, when you're looking in this view, these are correct side up, but these don't make sense because they have to be viewed differently. Okay. Suppose you were looking at this wall, these make perfect sense, so do these, but these do not. And the same thing is happening here. Okay, I mentioned earlier these genie. At the top of these triangular spaces, you have oxen head. These are painted to resemble sculpture. And between the triangular areas, you have fictive. Again, this is all painted architecture. It's not real anymore. This is all painted. You have fictive niches, which are flanked by pilasters topped by putti, pairs of putti. Okay? And above them are apparently blocks on which are seated the ignudi. And the ignudi have these sort of fabric bands which are threaded through what appear to be fictive bronze medallions. So there's a lot of illusionism going on here. All of this is painted except for these triangular areas. Everything else is painted. Here you have a fictive cornice, fictive pilasters, topped by fictive sculpted putti. The triangular spaces are topped by fictive oxen head, fictive sculpted oxen head. These genie figures that might be meant to look like painted humans or painted sculpted humans. We don't know. Okay? Painted bronze medallions, marble blocks, and painted fictive nude youth. Okay, so this actually gives you a good sense of all the illusionism that's happening. I'd like you to note one other thing here. The prophets, so between the triangular spaces, and I will come to this in a moment, there are prophets and sibyls who alternate with each other. Sibyls were pre-Christian oracles, okay? But it was believed that they foretold the coming of a Messiah, and that Messiah was Christ. Okay? So the prophets are also pre-Christian. They're Hebrew prophets who foretold the coming of a Messiah, and that Messiah is considered to be Christ by the Christians. Okay, so below the fictive thrones of these prophet and sibyl figures, you have a prophet on the left and a sibyl on the right. You have these inscribed plaques, fictive inscribed plaques because it's painted with their identifying them with their names. And I have an image somewhere where in the space, the narrow space below where these triangular arches meet, there's a painted human figure, a child, or not necessarily a puto, but unlike these putti, which are very clearly meant to be sculpture because they are painted in monochrome grisaille colors, the ones below these nameplates are painted in color. So it's not very clear. We'll look at that in a moment. I just wanted to give you a sense of where those appear. It's below these prophets and sibyls. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, this is a quick recap before we start looking at Michelangelo's work in designing this composition and his use of illusionism, and how he made so many different components fit together in a seamless manner where it just appears logical, even though when you start looking at details, it's not, it's anything but logical. Okay, so first thing, it's a curved vault. Okay, he uses a lot of monochrome. Most important is this fictive cornice. Okay? I should mention another term here, quadratura. Okay? So quadratura is a term in Italian that's used also in English to describe fictive architecture, like these pilasters topped by putti, which extends the space of a room up into the ceiling. Okay, so it's not actual architecture, it's fictive, it's painted architecture, which represents actual architecture in a manner that extends the physical architecture of the room upward towards the ceiling. Okay. The use of white for the fictive cornice, which actually here you can see the short edge also. Okay, so this fictive cornice and the fictive pilasters extend illusionistically the space of the room upwards, and they are merged with the ceiling, they're merged with the wall by means of various elements such as the inudi, such as the prophets and the genie. Okay, so the individual elements are numerous, the types of the individual elements are numerous, but they are tied together very coherently by Michelangelo in his exceptional composition for vault. Okay. This is an image on the right of the restorers working on the ceiling. Get a sense of what Michelangelo had to, or what he achieved, and how formidable his achievement was when you look at this photograph. On the left, you have a letter that Michelangelo wrote. He has a little caricature of himself painting the ceiling. Okay. This is a reconstruction on the upper right of the scaffolding, the type of scaffolding Michelangelo designed so that he could paint the walls without making holes and inserting framework into the structure, which would then be very difficult to paint over once the scaffolding was removed. Okay.
Reshma?
Yes, yes.
Reshma, just a little this thing. Can you just put on your earphones once again?
Sure.
Just for once, just let's see if there's a difference in the sound. And ladies and gentlemen, while Reshma puts this, that gentleman you see on the left on the picture, that's Gianluigi Colalucci. He was, yes, we can hear you, Reshma. You'll have to raise the volume from your computer a little bit. Let's see. Anyway, I was just saying this is Gianluigi Colalucci. He was the head restorer of the Vatican Museums.
I can see that you're talking, but I can't hear anything.
Yeah, we can hear you, but it's weak. Just try to say something to me.
I'm sorry, but I can't hear.
Okay, then I think you should go with your, just go without the earphones then.
Anupam, I'm unable to hear for some reason.
Okay, then let's go like this.
Okay, I apologize for that. I don't know what.
That's perfectly fine. All right.
Should I
Anyway, we'll talk about this later. Carry on, Reshma.
Should I speak a little louder?
Yeah, louder. It's echoing a bit actually. So this is
How
fine.
about if I come a little away from the screen? Does that make it better?
No, I think if you speak a little slower, it'll allow us to, the resolution will be a little better.
Okay, I'll try. All right. So here we have a passage from a biography of Michelangelo's that was published by his student, and while Michelangelo was alive, and in that he writes about the shape of the ceiling, that it's a barrel vault, and Michelangelo divided the work in this fashion, beginning at the brackets, so that is, I would say, the same level as this, the highest of the architectural cornices, where the horns of the lunettes rest. So that's here, up to almost a third of the arch of the vault. That means from here till here, the walls appear to continue flat. So we can see that the walls, the vault curves. But when we look at images of the triangular spaces and the prophets and sibyls between them, as we just saw, they appear straight. So Michelangelo beautifully compensated for the curvature of the vault. So the walls appear to continue flat, running up to that height with certain pilasters and plinths imitating marble, which project into the open like a balustrade over an additional story with corbels below, and with other little pilasters above the same stories where sit prophets and sibyls. Now, this figure that we're looking at on the left, just going to show you where it is over here. It's exactly in the center above the all-important altar wall. Okay. This is a figure of Jonah from the Old Testament, who is seen as a precursor of Christ because he was swallowed by a whale or a sea monster, survived 3 days and emerged intact. And this is considered to foreshadow Christ's death at the crucifixion, being entombed for 3 days, and then being resurrected. Okay? So Jonah is considered a precursor of Christ, a very important figure, and Michelangelo places him right above the high altar. Just like these edges are curved, the portion where Jonah is placed is also curved. And this was noted by Ascanio Condivi, where he said, but admirable above all the others is the prophet Jonah, placed at the head of the vault, because contrary to the form, the architectural structure of this part of the ceiling, by force of light and shade, through shading, the torso of Jonah, which is foreshortened so that it goes back away into the roof, is on the part of the arch that is nearest the eye. So this figure appears to be leaning backwards, but structurally, in physical terms, this portion of the picture field is the one closest to the viewer because it curves inwards towards us. And the feet and the legs which as it were project, which seem to come towards us, which seem to be closest towards us, are actually on the furthest part of the wall, because that wall, the curvature moves away from us. A stupendous performance which shows what marvelous power was in this man, Michelangelo, of turning lines in foreshortening and perspective. Okay. Now, to get a sense of how these figures interact with each other, or how they're placed within this fictive architectural framework that Michelangelo created. Between the triangular portions, which are above the lunettes, remember that you have the triangular portions which are above the lunettes, and you have the windows below. Okay, and this continues. So between the triangular portions, you have fictive niches. We looked at details just a while ago, where you have Old Testament prophets interspersed with Sibyls. Okay, so you have one prophet, one Sibyl, one prophet, one Sibyl, and so on. And in these triangular spaces above the triangular compartments, you have the genii. And above the pilasters which form the sides of the niches where the prophets are seated, where the thrones where the prophets are seated, above them you have these fictive marble blocks on which the inudi are seated. The prophet and Sibyl figures, that's these figures, are about 10 feet high. Okay. Okay. The first thing I'd like you to note over here is below the prophet's throne, you have the figure holding up the inscribed plaque, a fictive plaque. It's all painted. So we have a detail on the upper right of the slide. And it's very difficult to get photographs of these figures. So they're here in each of these spaces. There's a similar figure position, but it's very difficult to get the photographs. So these are the lowest figures painted. They're on the same level as the lunettes. And look at how beautifully Michelangelo fits them into this awkward space. It's a triangular space. He has them with their arms uplifted and carrying the plaques to fill the space. It makes perfect sense. So it may not, like a lot of what he's painted on the Sistine ceiling, it may not make sense when you start questioning as to what is this figure supposed to be, what is its meaning, what is it doing there. But when you look at it in terms of structure, it fits perfectly and appears to be coherent. Okay? Here, it's very simple. It's a figure that's carrying a plaque. All of these and all of the figures, they carry plaques. Unlike these genii, where we don't really know what they're doing, what they're supposed to represent, the figures below the thrones of the prophet have a very clear function. They hold up the nameplates of the prophets. Okay? Whether they represent sculpted figures or they represent actual figures is not clear. One more of those confusing portions of Michelangelo's Illusionism. Contrast this kind of figure with the paired putti. So both the paired putti and these, I'm going to call them the plaque figures. The plaque figures are painted, but the paired putti are very obviously meant to represent architectural sculpture. They are meant to represent sculpted figures that form part of the architecture. Of course, it's all fictive. So they are fictive architecture, fictive sculpture. A point of interest about these paired putti is that every pair of putti flanking the prophets is actually the same pair in mirror image. So if you just let's assume Michelangelo had a cartoon that he used on the left side. He just flipped it over and made the outline. But in the coloring, he changed the coloring, the shading, so that it appeared as if the sculpted figures were responding to light which falls on them differently, just because of their different positions in the composition. Note also the fictive cornice above, how realistic it looks, how straight these pilasters look. We know that this is a curved area. We know, just like the prophet Jonah that we looked at, that this portion is further away from us. And I beg your pardon. Yes, this portion is further away from us. The upper portion is closer, as the here you can see it over here as the vault curves inwards. Okay, I did mention this. You can just look at the details. I'm going to zoom in. And now I want you to just think about, here we have an image of the Camera degli Sposi, Mantegna's composition, which is, again, it's all fictive, it's painted. It appears to be open to the sky. It has these sotto in su perspective, and there are fictive marble medallions around it. Now, you will notice that each of these is correctly viewed from specific sides. Okay, whereas the center, you can go anywhere and look, it makes sense. The image at the bottom is the ceiling of the Camera della Badessa, the Camera di San Paolo, done by Correggio. And there was an actual umbrella vault, and he divided it and created these fictive openings to the sky. The point I want to make here is that using an architectural framework, a fictive architectural framework, to create the basis of your composition for an illusionistic ceiling was quite the norm in Italian ceiling painting. And these two images that you see on the right predate Michelangelo's work on the Sistine ceiling and are both from the Vatican itself, okay? Where again, there's a use of architectural framework to divide the space, to create the composition as a whole, and then the details were filled in. Michelangelo used a similar framework or a similar idea, but a very different kind of framework, because his framework has an emphasis on horizontal, verticals and horizontals. Okay. Remember that the triangular portions were pre-existing. Those were not designed by him, they were incorporated by him into his composition. The important thing to understand here is that Michelangelo fused so many different kinds of fictive decoration into one whole that appears absolutely cogent, absolutely coherent as a whole. And he did this. The most important, I think, the most important compositional feature that he used for this was this fictive cornice. This outline forming the basis from which everything else grew. Once he got this in order, he was able to fill in the different portions and make it absolutely cogent. Okay, now let's understand what I mean by that. Here we have two early drawings by Michelangelo, where there are details of the Sistine ceiling. And you see that on the left, he uses this diamond kind of pattern and a lot of architectural detailing. Okay? And he has this idea for the prophet or the Sibyl seated on a throne over here. And it's an idea that is in keeping with these kind of architectural frameworks. Okay? Something similar on the right. And now we'll look at another drawing. This is a very interesting drawing that requires very close study. Okay, so if you look at this area here, you have Michelangelo's idea, just a very rough idea for his Sistine ceiling. And you see over here that this is the basic structure he used to create all the different kinds of illusionism that appear on his in his composition. Okay, so I mentioned that the illusionistic extension of a room space upwards into the ceiling, as if the architecture extends there, is called Quadratura. So this is an example, a brilliant example of Quadratura painting. Here's the confusing part, and we've almost reached the end. I know I'm a little over time. I apologize for that. When you look at these spine panels, right? When you look at, for example, here you have God separating light from darkness, creating the sun and the moon, and all of this. These three compositions have the Sotto in Su perspective. They are taking place in the sky. It's appropriate that we look upwards and we see these happening there. It's the illusionism is perfect in that sense. You're standing below it, you look up, and these compositions cater to the viewpoint of someone standing down and looking up, the Sotto in Su perspective. But when you look at the creation of Adam and the creation of Eve, so there is a sky in the background, but these could easily be wall paintings. You're looking at them head on, even though they're placed up above you. So Michelangelo was not really looking to unify the backgrounds of all the most prominent panels that you have in the spine. And this can create some confusion at times, because if you read somewhere that, okay, you know, the God panel, the creation of sun and moon, there's foreshortening, there's the Sotto in Su perspective, and it's perfect. Then you look at the creation of Adam that you know so well, and you can't really see, is it really the Sotto in Su, or is it a normal perspective? It's more normal. You could maybe stretch it and say God's in the air, but it's still, he's higher than Adam, but there's nothing to really suggest that he is above us and we are looking up at him, straight up at him. Okay, now this is just a quick recap to hopefully by now you have a sense of how complex the ceiling is and where each of these different portions fit in. So Michelangelo's decoration starts above this level. So you can't see below here, you have the fictive tapestry at the lowest level, you have a cornice, you have these narrative panels, another cornice, you have the windows which are flanked by fictive niches with portraits of individual popes within them. And above this, the last of the actual cornices, you have the lunettes and the triangular spaces which have the ancestors of Christ depicted in them. I did not mention the contents of these corner pendentives. They have Old Testament narrative scenes. Okay? Now here you can see the figures that carry the plaques with the names of the prophets and sibyls above them. We know that the springing of the wall starts at this level. Okay, so it starts curving inwards from here. And above this, you have the Michelangelo's Fictive Cornice all the way through. And beyond that, you have the central panels that have a different orientation. The smaller panels have the inudi, which have the same orientation as all of what we're looking at over here. Okay. I mentioned the inudi, so I'm not going to repeat that here, but you'll get a sense with, I know these yellow circles look really ugly, but I wanted them to stand out so that you get a sense of how Michelangelo mixed the perspectives, how brilliantly he did it. So all of these scenes are meant to be viewed this way, yeah? But these portions continue the viewpoint of a viewer standing in front of and looking up the walls. So there is a mix, a calculated mix of viewpoints that don't have architectural definition. Let me rephrase that. That don't have architectural compartments defining their limits, because the way the inudi are positioned, they overlap the fictive frames of the central panels of the spine. And that makes them integrated into the entire composition, but it also makes it visually complex and often confusing. Okay, this is another example like one we looked at earlier, which I'm going to, split along here and rotate 90 degrees to left and right. So now you have the prophet and the sibyl facing correctly, the bronze medallions facing correctly, the inudi facing correctly, but the narrative scenes now are no longer correctly, appropriately viewed from this viewpoint. Okay. Quick, some details of the bronze medallions, which have some Old Testament scenes and some scenes that have not been convincingly identified. They're very confusing elements again, but very, very beautiful, very, very important in terms of the overall composition. So I'm almost at the end. Here we have the main architectural framework, the main feature. We saw that in the drawing where it doesn't appear much, but this is what grounds the entire composition. The triangular spaces are actual architectural features. These are Michelangelo's architectural framework, his Quadratura, that gives the visual framework to everything that he has included. All the numerous different kinds of components that he has included in this incredible ceiling composition. Okay, so with that, I end, and now I'm happy to answer questions. So let me just move out of this.
Thank you very much, Reshma. Thank you very much. And as some members of the audience have mentioned, that it is really nice getting this perspective of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, because you generally, as you said, even when we see this in real life or we see it in books, we often, it is overwhelming, and you tend to lose the stories because there's so much around. And it's very good that you gave this very clear indication of the spine, the orientation of the ones in the center, and that how we should not make that effort always to look at the ones above the, the spandrels going up like this. I think that was extremely, extremely useful. And I don't know if you realize how useful this has been for us to be able to now read the paintings. And that makes all the difference. Thank you so very much.
Others, because I was very worried that it might just come across as, there's nothing about the paintings as such. I mean, everybody talks about the creation of Adam and all of the meaning.
Yes.
I will say that why this was very important to me. There are so many times I would visit the Sistine Chapel and get thoroughly confused because I would have in my idea, okay, this is here, and then I could not. So finally, I got a really good guidebook, and then I would take that with me, and I would just sit down and look at different things, and I still could not remember how it worked. And planning this presentation for me was a way of hopefully helping others avoid that painful process.
Yes, it did. It really did. It really did. And then I had a few questions which were in tow earlier. One was, well, there is symbolism to the figures and the medallions and with the inudi, right? They were not just for framing.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's this question which is also it's answering itself. It says, is there a color scheme for different figures, which is different for the smaller figures and different for the larger figures?
Okay. So the simple answer to that is yes, there's a consistency between the different types of figures. But what they're supposed to convey, the meaning is not clear. Okay? And there's a lot of debate about some of them. Just to give you a simple example, the inudi, okay? They are colored like actual nude human youth. But are they supposed to be actual people sitting there? There are some scholars who suggest that they are angels, that Michelangelo depicted them without wings because that's how he did it. So they're supposed to be angels. There are others who, the genie figures, what exactly are they doing? Those are the genie figures and the medallions are, for me, the most confusing. I don't have an answer to that. The figures that hold the plaques identifying the prophets and the sibyls. Now, their function is very clear. They are just indicating the names. They're decorative elements in that awkward position, indicating the names. But do they? It's very possible they have more significance, and I don't know. The scholarship on the Sistine Chapel, the composition it's like a deluge. There's so much, and there's not always agreement. There are certain things that I didn't even touch upon. But coming back to the question, that it's a question I've asked myself and I don't have an answer to, but I think it's very interesting to approach the different types of figures with the type of coloring used for them to try and understand two things. One is compositionally, what was Michelangelo trying to achieve? So, and the second is, in terms of meaning, what was he trying to convey? Okay? And these are open questions. I do not have an answer for them. It's very clear with the paired putti on the sides of the prophet and sibyl thrones, they're meant to represent sculpted figures. And their color, that white, off-white marble color, is the same color as the cornice. So when you look at this huge composition with so much of color and so much happening, just having the clear framework in white, off-white, gives it a very rational basis. Even if when you start looking at the details, it's not as rational as it might appear. I can't
Reshma, there's one question related to the plaques, and that talks about this plaque which has Alexander and Jerusalem.
Yes,
can you share something about it a little bit? Just something about it. Can you throw a little more light on this particular plaque?
Short answer, no, but let me explain why.
Okay.
The medallions. So those are the bronze medallions. Okay, the plaque is, I just use the term plaque for the names of the figures. The bronze medallions and the genie are, and it just so happens both of them have those earth tones, bronze tones, are elements of the composition that I have not found very satisfying interpretations of. Okay, so from the little that I know, I mean, Alexander before the high priest it's an interesting, it's a potential subject because it is a ruler figure, a king bowing down before a religious figure. Okay? And that's a very important motif in papal art because the Pope was spiritual and temporal ruler of Rome, but he had very difficult relationships with the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and all of this. So having this imagery, the kind of imagery where a temporal ruler, a duke, a king, an emperor is kneeling before a religious figure is very important to the Pope, very important for the papacy. Okay? So I will say that I don't, and that said, maybe that identification is not precise for that medallion. I don't know.
Okay. And then talking of the medallions and all the visuals, in terms of, you know, this took how many years, from 1508 to 1512 or something? So somebody's, there's a question that says, any idea of the compensation he received for such a thing?
Actually, I don't want to say something stupid because I'm very bad with these figures, but it is documented. I think there's a letter. There might be a letter from Michelangelo where he says he was paid 3,000 scudi and he spent 25 on color or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But this is documented.
So about 3,000 ducats.
3,000.
3,000 ducats. Yeah, in his record, he does mention the advance of 500 ducats right at the beginning, which was given by two officers from the papal palace. Okay, excellent. And the next question I'd like to take up here is that was the chapel open to the public?
Right now?
No, then, at that time.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is actually a really interesting part of art history. Michelangelo was very secretive about his composition, so he actually kept it under lock and key. And this is something I didn't mention just because of shortage of time, but it's quite well known. Michelangelo was commissioned by the Pope to make his tomb. That tomb was supposed to be placed under the dome of St. Peter's. It was supposed to be enormous, 3 stories, 60 plus life-size figures. And Michelangelo considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. And that's the commission that he wanted. And he would do any, he was after it. The Pope had other ideas. The Pope was waging war, blah, blah. Meanwhile, Bramante, who was the papal architect and a relative of Raphael's, wanted to be rid of Michelangelo. And he suggested to the Pope, recommended Michelangelo, whom he didn't like, who was a rival of his, to paint the ceiling. Basically, his aim was to sabotage Michelangelo's career. He even suggested scaffolding, and Michelangelo was like, you know, your scaffolding, the regular scaffolding, would drill holes into the wall. And how do we rectify that after the painting is done? And Bramante said, oh, you know, by the time we get there, we'll figure it out. So Michelangelo understood that this was not a good faith recommendation that had been made. He did not want to do the ceiling. But the Pope was using carrot and stick. You want to do the tomb? Do the ceiling. So ultimately, he got roped into doing the ceiling. The hope was that Bramante was an expert in perspective, that Michelangelo would make an ass of himself and basically be kicked out of Rome, leaving the field open for Bramante and Raphael. Now coming to the question of, was the ceiling open? So when Michelangelo reluctantly began painting the ceiling, he made every effort to keep Bramante and Raphael out of the ceiling and anybody else, because he was sure they will try to copy him, sabotage him, all of this. And Bramante had a key. He was the papal architect. He managed to sneak Raphael in at some point. And when Raphael saw, this is the short answer is, it was not supposed to be open to anyone, okay? But people did enter. And when he saw what Michelangelo had achieved, there was an instant change in Raphael's style, or I don't want to say a change in his style, a growth in his pictorial vocabulary, where he took what he learned from Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling figures and used it in his stanza, which he was doing at the same time. So, as I said, no one was supposed to, but some did.
And they were both young. So there's a question that links to this. How old was Michelangelo when he painted the ceiling?
How old was he? So he died in 1564. You know what? Right now, my brain's not working, but that'll be easily available online.
So Reshma, he was about 33 when he started. Just mentioning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now there was this thing about were there hidden motives meant to insult the Pope?
That's a very interesting question. So I'm going to qualify that answer with maybe, but insult the Pope is a very strong word. Michelangelo was a deeply religious man. Okay, when he painted the Last Judgment, he refused to take payment for it because for him it was an act of faith. Okay, so that he would include in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel insults to the Pope is unthinkable. That said, there are certain very naughty components which are difficult to explain. I would not categorize them as insults to the Pope, though. That's too harsh and I think unfair.
Right. Okay. In terms of there's an interesting question which links up with a few more, and it says that there's some technical aspects. We'll take those later. This one is about. It is believed that the nudes were covered up by one of the popes later, and they were restored later. Is it true?
Yes, that is in the Last Judgment. So a lot of the Last Judgment figures were covered up because they were considered scandalous in their nudity. A lot of the coverings were removed. Some could not be removed.
Yeah. Yeah, true. In fact, if I remember rightly, it's about, I think there were 54 such figures where the
and if I remember rightly, 18 were not doable.
Yeah. All right. This is then it comes to a question like what sort of a scaffolding was used for this? So you had explained this earlier also.
Yeah. The main point here is Michelangelo designed his scaffolding. It was custom made to not to damage the roof in the ceiling in any manner. Okay, and the simplest example would be the sketch I had put up, which I just I don't know how clear this is going to be, but if that's the vault and there's this part would be the scaffolding. Okay, so it doesn't enter the structure at all. It's a supporting.
Independent. It's like a supporting. Excellent. And well, to Alex Coutinho's question, why was the Judgment Day painted at the altar? Why not any other episode from the life of Christ?
So that's the topic of an entire talk.
Yep.
Short answer. If you look at the different themes covered in the previous painting, the Last Judgment makes perfect sense on the altarpiece. On the long walls of the chapel, you have scenes from the life of Christ and scenes from the life of Moses. On the ceiling, you have everything that from the Old Testament that led up to Christ. Okay, so the ceiling is literally from the creation of the world, right, to the flood. Then you have Moses, then you have Christ. And the Last Judgment is literally Christ deciding who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. So it completes the entire cycle very beautifully.
So we have about 13 more minutes for us to arrive at 12:30. So I will take a few more questions. One is now this is I had left something about the color and technique of painting.
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Something about the colors, the question about the technicalities.
Okay, this is a very controversial subject. So Michelangelo's colors, I'll try to just give it to you in 3 sentences. After the restoration of the Sistine ceiling, the compositions that had basically been covered in grime and soot for hundreds of years suddenly became clear. Okay, so a lot of details that couldn't be seen became clear. And there are 2 schools of thought here. There are those who say, oh, Michelangelo's original colors have finally come back to life. And there are those who say that the cleaning took away the modulation of, along with the dirt and the grime, it took away the modulation of color that Michelangelo used. So the colors you see now are, to put it crudely, nude colors. They don't have the final finish that Michelangelo would have given it. The controversy apart, one thing for sure about Michelangelo's color, he used combinations of colors in a very unexpected way on the Sistine Chapel. And that's called Kanjante Coloring. The best way to explain this would be if you think about certain silk saris which have this double coloring. So in shifting light, you'll see maybe a pink and a green juxtaposed. And in Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling, the colors he uses are similar. They are shimmery silk-like colors, which were very unorthodox for the time and were taken up by artists immediately after the unveiling of the ceiling.
Okay. And then in terms of the anything about the technique of painting?
The technique of painting. So Michelangelo did not consider himself a painter. He considered himself a sculptor. Okay. Initially, he had a team of painters he had called from Florence to help him. Eventually, he kicked them out because he was not happy with the work they did. I think the medallions are done by others, not by Michelangelo, to a large extent. And as far as technique goes, there is evidence that initially he used cartoons to do the outlines of the figures, but eventually he grew in confidence and was painting almost directly onto the painted surface. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Just one question on the restoration of the paintings. So should I answer that? Should I chip in with that a little bit so that we get that? It's a wide question because restoration started right at the beginning. When the chapel was built, because it was built on the foundations that were weak. There was a chapel, the Cappella Magna, and the Cappella Magna's foundations were the one that took this building, and this building has walls which are almost 3 meters wide. So basically cracks started developing right at the beginning. And in fact, way back in 1504, there were 12 metal stitching chains that were put earlier to hold the vault in place. So there was always the chance of the vault breaking up. But eventually, in fact, in 1520 or 1522 sometime, a part of the architrave near the entrance fell, and one person was also killed at that time. And that time, some buttresses were placed on the vault, on the side of the vault, so that in fact, and since then, the structure has remained in place. if you know, Reshma, you showed us the picture of God separating the waters. There is this outstretched hand of God, and that hand, if you see, it was a different brown color. So this had fallen down, and even Adam's, you know, when the two fingers are touching each other, God creating Adam, if you see the fingers at the back of his, those were lost. So this gentleman called Domenico Carnevali, he actually restored these and about 4-6 more areas which had fallen off at that time. So conservation had started right then. The major damages that happened to these wall paintings, as you mentioned, all this brown and all, that was because of the candle soot and the incense that was used to be burned there. There was water seepage from the ceilings, which had called this white patches all over the painting. And there was something interestingly called glue pox, Reshma, that caused damage to the paintings. You see, they used to take these animal glues in long sticks, heat up the animal glue with ox gall and some vinegar and all, and you know, with these long brushes, paint the ceiling so that it becomes like a varnish, so you can see it better. And this, when it contracted, picked out areas of paint. And the fact is, when we talk about this restoration thing, a lot of these areas were repainted over and over again, especially the shadows of Michelangelo's works. And that is why this whole, in fact, you showed a picture when Gianluigi Colalucci, the head restorer of the Vatican Museum, he died recently in March, actually, just a month back, less than a month back. This entire ceiling had become monochrome, just a brown hue, which completely hid Michelangelo's bravura, so to speak, which hid Michelangelo's way of working, because there were shadows painted over and over again. And this is proven by all the cross sections that have been taken. The restoration took almost 14 years. And the entire restoration is filmed in real time, Reshma, by this Japanese NTV. Yeah, exactly, Nippon Television. And it's about 3 kilometers of film, which is all there in the Vatican archives, in refrigerators, even today. So, I mean, so the restoration was, and it was a very simple arrival at the formulation of solvents. And it's really good work. It's really good work, even if one may say so. The other thing, for those who are talking about the colors and all that was used, there was, again, there was, we must remember that Michelangelo also was an apprentice to Ghirlandaio in his workshop as a fresco. So right from childhood, he actually was very young. And that is the time he took in all this. And as you said, but he always used to write sculptor. Even in his letters home, he would, Michelangelo sculptor, he would write, yes. But the fact was, you saw, and it is all sculptural, and all his painting is sculptural. The color, because, and that's a fact, that his paintings never degraded because he knew exactly what were the most compatible colors, pigments that would be used with the frescoes. Right, so he used for white, he used Bianco di San Giovanni, which Correggio and others had also used. There were 2 types of blacks he used. One was a wine black and an ivory black. For the browns, he used the brown earths, the umber, the burnt sienna, and the Mars brown. For the red, he used a red ochre, and raw sienna. For yellow, he used yellow ochre, and no, for red, he used red ochre and burnt sienna. For yellow, he used yellow ochre and raw sienna. And 2 more colors he used. One was green, which was green earth. And for blue, he used smalt and also a bit of lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli was lost because it is applied a secco. And so this was basically his palette that has been analyzed and confirmed, and it's incontrovertibly that was his palette. He knew to avoid mercury and lead pigments because they degrade with lime plaster, though there are little traces of cinnabar and red lead. But I think this would answer the questions on, we can't go beyond this. That will be another lecture.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just,
So I think this is, yeah.
I would really recommend to everybody to just type, do a Google search for virtual tour of Sistine Chapel. On the Vatican Museum website, they have an excellent tour that I really recommend you use it, because it will give you a sense of just how complex the entire decoration is, but especially for the ceiling, it works wonderfully.
Right. So, and then there's one question now related back to this area, and this would be the last question that we take today. It says, well, I don't know if you want to, why didn't Michelangelo start painting the Quadratura from between the spandrels? Well, I think
I would defer to Michelangelo on that. Whatever he did, he's achieved something phenomenal. I would not really question as to why didn't he do something else.
I suppose. And Reshma, do the Old and New Testament figures on either sides also follow some chronological or thematic sequence?
Okay. This is not the ceiling. This is, we're talking about the chapel walls, the life of scenes from the life of Moses and scenes from the life of Christ. I think they're chronological, but they might not be. The important thing is there are inscriptions above each of them. Each panel has an inscription on top, which there are pairings between the Old Testament and New Testament scenes that face each other. So there is an emphasis on the importance of the Pope as spiritual leader. So the selection of the scenes from the Old and the New Testament work towards consolidating the position of the Pope.
Okay. We have just 1 minute left. So is there any relation between the ceiling and the flooring?
The flooring is decorative. It's not figural at all. So
all right.
I would say no.
Okay.
But the flooring responds to divisions within the space according to the use. I won't be able to if you just Google the root screen or chancel screen of the Sistine Chapel, you'll get more information on that. The ceiling, the flooring takes that into consideration.
Okay, and then the last question is, what did he think of his own creation?
I will just say this. He wanted to do the tomb, and he called the tomb the tragedy of his life, because the 3-story, 60 life-size figure tomb it got diminished into a very sad 2-story, 7-figure kind of thing. So I assume he was thrilled about it, but he was not thrilled that it came at the cost of the tomb that he had set his heart on.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think we have reached our 1 hour 30 minutes and sharp on the dot. Okay. And there are questions like, was the drapery behind God? Could it be a representation of the human brain? I think we'll give you Reshma's email address, and you could ask her these questions, which are more of, more like an evening conversation, because that can go on and get networked into other thoughts. In the film Agony and Ecstasy, they showed Michelangelo painting lying down. Is it true, or did he paint standing up, as you had mentioned?
I haven't seen the movie. I've read the book. I enjoyed that book. I would really recommend read it, because you'll get the idea of the tragedy of the tomb and how important the tomb was as compared to the Sistine ceiling to him. Yeah.
Right. I think we with your kind permission, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will stick to the time.
Just one thing very quickly.
Yes.
Anupam. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know whether he was lying down, but he did complain the letter that I had an image of where he had the sketch of himself. He complained about this posture that he was in. He was stuck in for so long.
Yes. Yes.
So
very true.
It was an awkward posture.
Yes. Very good.
Sorry, the last question is, did he eventually get that commission for the sculpture that he was vying for?
Yes, but it was a watered down, instead of being a C plus life-size figures, it was maybe less than a tenth of what he had wanted to do.
Okay. And there's one question from Firoza. Would you like to say something?
Just complimenting you, and definitely Irving Stone and The Agony and the Ecstasy movie that came out 5 decades ago. See it if you're interested in this. It's a brilliantly written book. I agree with you, Reshma. It's a very good introduction for anyone seeking a career as an art student. And there are many more, Gauguin, Van Gogh, right into the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. Mr. Dinesh Nayyar, your hand has been up for some time. Would you like to say
father,
something?
oh God.
Oh, okay. All right. So I think with this, I'll just thank everybody once again. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, Francesca, the Italian Cultural Center, Mr. Mukherjee, the CSMVS Museum, Signora Costanza, and all the team at the Italian Cultural Center and the Italian Office of the Italian Consulate General. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We see you the alternative Saturday after this. And Reshma, what are you going to talk about on the next Saturday?
I don't know, but right after this, I have to ask my father what his question was. Next Saturday is Annibale Carracci, the Cornice ceiling in Rome.
Okay, excellent. Annibale Carracci next time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Do feel free to write to us. Yes, the recording will be available in due course. And we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Buona giornata a tutti. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you once again. Thank you, Samiksha, for hosting this for us. Thank you.